Under the merciless sun, Agatha staggered forward, every breath a torment, every step a battle against the burning ground beneath her feet. Her frail frame, wrapped in tattered cloth, seemed almost swallowed by the vast emptiness around her. Alone, abandoned to the cruelty of the desert, she fought against an unforgiving silence, her heart pounding louder than the whispering wind. Time was a thief, stealing strength and hope alike. The desert sprawled endlessly, a barren wasteland where the fierce heat bent the horizon and the sky cracked with relentless blue. The air shimmered with the taste of dust and parched earth. The only sounds were the soft, cruel susurros of the wind sliding between sun-cracked rocks, and the distant shadows of bandoleros and hunters who prowled silently, unseen but ever present. Travelers passed through like ghosts, their eyes averted, unwilling to be tethered by the sight of a broken woman left to die. Agatha's skin burned, dry and cracked from the scorching sun. Her lips, cracked and bleeding, barely formed whispered prayers for salvation. Step by trembling step, she pressed forward, despite dizzying exhaustion and the creeping fog of delirium that clouded her mind. The vast nothingness pressed on her chest, relentless and cold in its indifference. Fear gnawed at her resolve, fear not only of death, but of being forgotten, truly forsaken in this wild world. Not far beyond the ridge, Tayan, a young Apache warrior, knelt among the sparse scrub. His dark eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon with quiet intensity. On a mission suffused with personal meaning, seeking answers only the winds could tell, he paused suddenly as a faint, trembling sound carried on the wind. A hushed voice, faint and fragile, barely more than a breath. Instinct and honor pulled him forward, pushing through thorn and stone until he found her, a woman fading into the desert's embrace. Though unfamiliar, a deep compassion stirred in Tayan's heart. The desert demanded respect and gave none in return. To abandon her meant death, cruel, silent, inevitable. Yet to aid a stranger could expose him to dangers few dared face. Suspicion from his own people, pursuit by ruthless bandits or armed patrols, or worse, the unforgiving desert itself punishing his mercy. The dilemma weighed on him, an invisible chain tightened by duty and empathy. Approaching cautiously, Tayan knelt by Agatha's side, producing from his pack a small water skin and some hard bread. His voice was low, steady, a tether thrown across a gulf of doubt. She flinched, but took the sustenance, the cold water like a balm on her cracked tongue. Words came painfully, a blend of broken gratitude and cautious whispers, suspicion mingling with desperate hope. His eyes searched hers, reflecting not fear, but a shared vulnerability beneath hardened exteriors. With each passing moment, the sun sank deeper, staining the sky with blood-red hues. Agatha gathered what strength she had left to whisper her story, while Tayan's resolve steeled against the encroaching darkness. The bond between rescuer and rescued was fragile, newly woven in the harsh crucible of survival. Suddenly, on the far horizon, A wall of dust billowed and rolled like a beast awakened, a massive sandstorm advancing with terrible speed, swallowing the light and threatening all in its path. The dread was immediate and suffocating. The desert's deadly breath pressed down upon them, turning their fight for life into a race against nature itself. Many fellow travelers who walk these forgotten trails have told us how fate, or YouTube's treacherous algorithm, sometimes erases their subscriptions without warning. Before the next perilous turn and a new twist unfolds, take a quick look down below the video and make sure you're still subscribed to our band so you don't lose the thread. We don't want you to miss any of the voices echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The cave shadow swallowed them as Tayan guided Agatha inside, shielding her fragile frame from the merciless desert wind and the rapidly approaching sandstorm. The narrow entrance masked the bitter world outside, a sanctuary carved from ancient stone that whispered secrets of a time long past. Inside, the air was cool, almost moist, a welcome reprieve from the blazing sun and swirling dust. Tayan knelt beside Agatha, carefully removing the coarse cloth that clung to her cracked skin. He dipped a rag into the small water skin, pressing it gently to her parched lips. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, clouded with pain, but flickers of recognition sparked in their depths. She tried to speak, but her voice was a faint rasp. Tayan listened with patience, urging her with soft words in his native tongue and the rough English. She understood. Slowly, fragments of her story began to surface. Tales of the earth, its hardships and its hidden grace. The legends whispered by the Apache, and a secret she carried like a burden, one she guarded fiercely. Distrust draped over her like a phantom. Tayan saw it in the way she flinched when he touched her hand, in the sharp glance cast over his shoulder when voices echoed from distant settlers setting up camp beyond the ravine. The promise of shelter remained fragile, a thread stretched thin between two wary souls. Yet, amid the tension, a fragile bond wove itself through moments of silence and shared vulnerability. Outside their fragile refuge, the desert breathed its restless breath. Shadows shifted across the rocky outcroppings as predatory eyes, wild coyotes, and desert wolves prowled just beyond the firelight's reach. Tayan sharpened a makeshift spear while keeping a watchful ear tuned to the undercurrents of the night. The desert was merciless, unforgiving to the weak, and threats were not limited to nature's beasts. Settlers' hatred simmered like unseen embers, fueled by prejudice and fear. Tayan had learned long ago the weight of cautious steps. The first night tested both of them. Agatha's fragile frame convulsed with fever, her body trembling as visions danced behind closed eyelids. She murmured in fading whispers, stories of ancient Apache rites, sacred grounds lost beneath shifting sands, a legacy buried beneath their feet. Her hands trembled, scars unseen beneath the dirted folds of her sleeve. Tayan's resolve steeled. Protecting her was more than mercy, it was honor. Yet, an uneasy sound cut through the calm. The faint crackle of footsteps, distant but growing. Days blended into nights, marked only by the fading strength of Agatha and the growing restlessness of their pursuers. Tayan set traps near the cave's mouth, fashioned from jagged rocks and thorny brush, hoping to slow any unwanted approach. He scavenged what little the desert grudgingly offered, bitter mesquite pods and sparse water from a hidden seep known only to his people. Twice, settlers' dogs bayed nearby, prowling the edges of the ravine. Each encounter sharpened the tension between hope and doom. Inside the cave, Agatha's guarded tales painted a portrait of a woman burdened, not only by age, but by memory. She spoke of her youth, whispered names from the tribe's histories, the sacred sites where ancestors once danced beneath the moon. Her voice, though weak, held a fire, a stubborn flicker against the encroaching death that sought to claim her. Slowly, she revealed a key to the enigma. Beneath these very lands lay something precious, hidden from eyes greedy for gold and power. She spoke of artifacts, relics of a forgotten era, keepers of a story that could shape the destiny of many. One evening, as the sun bled into twilight, Tayan stepped outside to find fresh footprints pressed deep into the dust. They trailed toward the cave, deliberate and measured. Men armed and intent on uncovering that secret. His heart tightened as he traced the tracks, knowing well the weight they carried. These were not common bandits, mercenaries hungry for spoils, heedless of life or legacy. Back within the narrow cave walls, Agatha's eyes met Tayan's in a silent plea, a mix of fear and unyielding will. "They come for what I protect," she whispered. "If they find it, if they mine the earth beneath our feet, they will tear everything apart. The land, my memories, your people." Tayan nodded grimly, muscles tense, as he readied his spear and scanned the entrance. The desert around them was quiet, but pregnant with menace. The fragile shield of the cave, both their sanctuary and their prison. A scream echoed from beyond the rocks, a harrowing sound cut short by a brutal silence. Tayan's breath caught. The threat was close, ready to break their fragile refuge. His grip tightened on his weapon, eyes piercing through the dimmest shadows. Outside, the mercenaries tightened their net, following every footprint and whisper, hunger burning in their eyes. They sought the riches buried within this land, unseen but fiercely protected by the old woman and the boy who dared defy them. The night held its breath as the mercenaries, now mere steps away, prepared to descend upon the cave where destiny waited. And then came the faint, unexpected sound, a rustle of movement, not from the hunters, but from a shadow, moving with silent purpose among the stones. A young warrior's courage stirred the dust, preparing to unveil the secrets that had long been buried beneath the merciless sun. Jonas stepped into the dusty clearing with a swagger that betrayed his arrogance, his spurs clinking against the sun-baked stones. His eyes, sharp and cold, swept over the cave's mouth, a dim slit in the towering rocks where shadows clung like ghosts. Behind him, his ragged band of mercenaries paused, weapons resting on knees. Yet their gazes were heavy with hunger, not just for gold, but for power and destruction. Tayan's grip on his spear tightened inside the cave. He stood protectively close to Agatha, whose frail figure leaned against the cool stone wall, Her breathing was shallow, but steadied, as if the boy's silent promise of defense breathed life into her battered spirit. The old woman's eyes flickered with a new fire, not the faint flickering flame of before, but a steady glow born of grim determination. The tales she once feared to speak aloud now hung thick in the stale cave air, weighing between them all like a silent warning. Jonas was not just a man seeking treasure. He was a storm, relentless, deaf to pleas, deaf to history. His men mirrored his intensity, scanning the terrain for signs of the scattered hopes and secrets buried deep beneath this unforgiving land. They spoke little, but moved with an urgency that suggested the prize was more than mere gold. Agatha shifted slightly, pressing a trembling hand to her chest, summoning strength from a well long thought empty. "He is no friend," she murmured softly in a cracked voice, eyes narrowing towards the cave's opening. "Only in soil and stone, but in the blood spilled to protect it." And now a new chapter threatened to be written in fire and death. Slowly, the old woman reached beneath her tattered cloak, producing a yellowed parchment. Fragile, faded, yet unmistakably an ancient map. Its edges were torn and curled, bearing the marks of time and hidden hands. Agatha's fingers trembled over the fragmented lines and cryptic symbols. "This is all that remains," she said, voice barely audible. "The rest lost, shattered." Her gaze lifted to meet Tayan's, a silent plea heavy in its sorrow. Tayan stepped forward, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows across the faded ink. He traced a finger along the broken map, piecing together what clues he could: a jagged river, a crescent of hills, the faint emblem of a hawk, emblematic of his tribe's spirit. Despite the gaps, the map sang a song of heritage and hidden truth. The two shared a brief glance, a silent accord forged in shared purpose and desperation. To protect this fragment, to follow the echoes of their ancestors, was to refuse the erasure of their people's soul. But outside, the desert waited, patient and unforgiving. The low rumble of horses announced Jonas's return, his voice cutting through the air like a whip crack. "No one moves until we pry those secrets loose." His laughter rolled like thunder, arrogant and cruel. The cave's narrow entrance suddenly seemed less a refuge and more a gaping maw, trapping Agatha and Tayan against the rising tide of violence. Yet between them, a newfound trust grew. The old woman's stories were no longer lines of fear and fading memory. They were a call to arms, a thread uniting past and present. Jonas paced restlessly, his thoughts consumed by greed then conquest. The idea of an ancient cache of gold and relics was intoxicating, but more alluring still was the power to wield such history as leverage, the ability to rewrite narratives and bend futures to his will. Tayan raised his spear, voice low but steady. "We may be few and you many, but this land remembers. We will not let it bleed without fight." Agatha's gaze hardened. "More than gold lies beneath us. Knowledge, spirit, the lifeblood of my people. If it falls into his hands, it will spell ruin." Outside, the mercenaries tightened their formations, their rifles gleaming beneath the pale moonlight. The desert wind whispered through crevices, as if carrying warnings from the stones themselves. Suddenly, Agatha's gaze shifted, a flicker of hope in the worn depths of her weary eyes. She slowly produced a small, worn leather pouch hidden beneath her cloak. From it, she drew a scrap of delicate parchment, curled and stained, seeming out of place against her aged hands. "It is incomplete," she admitted quietly, "but it is a key, a piece of the puzzle that can lead us home, or to our doom." Tayan studied the fragment, his mind racing with possibilities. Every mark felt like a whisper from the past, urging him to move forward despite the shadows closing in. In that moment, he felt the heavy weight of responsibility settle like a shroud, not just to Agatha, but to the countless ancestors whose voices demanded no less. As the chill of night deepened, distant gunshots echoed, sharp and sudden. Mercenaries probing the cave's defenses, testing the resolve of those within. The fragile peace shattered. Tayan's heart thrummed wildly. "We must move swiftly. The map is only the beginning, but it may be all we have to save what's left." Agatha gazed at him, a faint smile breaking through the pain etched on her face. "Then we move together. Trust is our only weapon now." Beyond the cave's mouth, the desert stretched vast and ominous, holding its breath for the battle to come. Somewhere under the merciless sun, a legacy waited, its fate hanging on the courage of a boy and the stories of a lost elderly woman. And as the dim flicker of dawn began to bleed into the horizon, Agatha unfolded the ancient map once more, eyes tracing the fragmented lines of a treasure whose full shape remained a mystery, until the next piece revealed itself. The map was incomplete and fragmented, and its secrets were still waiting to be uncovered. The sun dipped low, casting long, jagged shadows across the barren land as Tayan and Agatha began their arduous journey. The brittle earth crunched beneath their worn boots and bare feet, the heat lingering stubbornly even as dusk crept in. The vastness of the desert stretched before them, a relentless expanse of rocks and choking dust, broken only by the sparse silhouettes of twisted mesquite and sun-bleached bones. Their pace was cautious, measured. Agatha leaned heavily on her makeshift staff, each step an echo of the strength she once carried but now barely held. Tayan walked beside her, eyes sharp and ever vigilant, scanning the horizon for threats, both human and natural. The promise of treasure and peril hung invisibly in the air ahead, tangled with secrets and shadows. The land bore scars, both ancient and fresh. Jagged cliffs cast cool shade in rare places, and dry riverbeds yawned empty, cracked by prolonged drought. The map, fragile in Agatha's trembling hands, guided them through the treacherous paths, while whispers of their ancestors seemed to murmur with every gust. These lands were more than dirt and stone. They carried the weight of histories too long buried. From the depths of the cave, Jonas's men had spread like vultures. The mercenaries trailed relentlessly, their heavy footsteps and muted whispers tangible threats in the silence of the desert. But Taeon's knowledge of the land lent them a fragile advantage. Detours and hidden crevices became their shield. Still, the specter of violence loomed large. As night settled, the stars stretched cold and indifferent overhead. Taeon spotted a faint glint just beyond a cluster of sandstone boulders. A glimmer, perhaps the eyes of prowling coyotes, or worse. He halted, motioning silently for Agatha to rest behind a natural outcropping. A dry wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the faint echo of distant laughter and the clinking of metallic spurs far behind. Their fragile truce with the desert was constantly tested. Hunger gnawed, thirst tormented, but the greater threat was always the human greed that chased them so relentlessly. Agatha's past, veiled in shadow and pain, seemed to flicker in and out with the passing days. Each fragment of her story she surrendered wove a tapestry of loss and resilience, pride and regret. One evening, under the waning moon, Agatha's eyes reflected a profound sorrow as she spoke softly of her identity, of roots tangled deeply with the Apache tribe whose lands they crossed. Her voice cracked like dry timber as she revealed truths long buried, that she was more than a weary traveler, but a keeper of stories, guardian of sacred relics passed through bloodlines and silence. Taeon listened, the flickering firelight painting their faces with shadows. The tension between respecting these ancient traditions and confronting the merciless greed chasing them weighed heavily on his young shoulders. The desert was not mercy's friend. It demanded strength, cunning, and courage. By the time the stars faded, Agatha and Taeon had encountered their first ambush. The mercenaries, headed by Jonas himself, had predicted their route and lain in wait behind twisted thorn bushes that scratched at their clothes and skin. Bullets tore through the air, a harsh reminder that every step forward would be paid in grit and blood. Taeon sprang to action. With swift precision, honed by years of training, he dodged into cover, returning fire with a makeshift bow he had crafted. Agatha, though frail, lifted a trembling hand, whispering a prayer as the acrid scent of gunpowder choked the air. The pale moon overhead witnessed the frail dance between predator and protector. The skirmish was brief but fierce. One mercenary fell, an agonized cry piercing the still night, before silence reclaimed the desert. Taeon helped Agatha to her feet, haste threading his movements now, urgency driving their escape deeper into the rocky labyrinth. Every breath was a gamble, every shadow a potential betrayer. Later, huddled in the narrow crease between two boulders, Agatha pressed a calloused palm to her chest, voice barely more than a tremor. There is more than gold beneath this land. A power older than time, tied to a prophecy whispered by my ancestors. If Jonas seizes it, it will not be just my people who suffer. The very fabric that holds us together will unravel. Taeon's dark eyes reflected the flickering flames from their small fire, the weight of responsibility settling heavier than the desert's heat. His fingers clenched around his spear, the primal tools of survival, almost insignificant against the magnitude of what hung in the balance. We must walk carefully, he said, voice low yet resolute. The land itself fights alongside those who honor it, but the greed chasing us moves like a shadow, relentless and cruel. As dawn painted the horizon with streaks of blood and gold, Tayan noticed fresh tracks imprinted in the dust, closer than before, more deliberate. A tremor of certainty ran through him. The traitor was near. The mercenary's net was tightening, and it was no longer an indiscriminate hunt, but a hunt guided by betrayal. A bitter wind shifted, carrying the faintest trace of voices, whispers hushed yet urgent. Tayan's gaze hardened. The fragile hope they nurtured within these ruthless lands wavered like a candle's flame in the storm. He glanced at Agatha, whose faded eyes gleamed with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. The treasure they sought was more than a prize. It was a legacy, a chance to rewrite the fate of a people long wronged. And beneath the indifferent sky, in the restless desert, those footsteps edged closer, heralding a reckoning that would rip trust asunder and shatter illusions of kinship. The trace of a shadow moved silently among the rocks. A young warrior's courage, standing against the gathering darkness, preparing to unveil the treachery that threatened to consume them all. The desert night pressed close around them, silent except for the faint shuffle of Agatha's labored breath against the cool stone of the cave. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air, thicker than the dust that settled between the jagged rocks. Tayan's eyes narrowed, fixed on the shadows just beyond the flicker of their small fire, haunted by the truth that now fractured their fragile alliance. The traitor was no stranger from the mercenaries' camp. No, this wound cut deep into the heart of their own people. A young Apache, once a brother in arms, seduced by the empty promise of gold, bitterly lured away from honor toward greed. That realization churned like venom in Tayan's gut. Each heartbeat a reminder that trust was a fragile thread stretched perilously thin. Agatha's voice, faint but resolute, broke the silence. "We always feared this, didn't we?" she whispered, her cracked hand clutching the ancient map closer, as if to shield the secrets it held. Betrayal is the shadow that walks among us, but the light still fights to find a way. Her gaze sought the boys, a flicker of fierce determination shimmering past her weariness. He may have turned his back on the blood that raised him. Still, the prophecy does not falter because of one lost soul. But this threatens to tear more than just our bonds. Tayan's fingers tightened around his spear, the polished wood rough beneath his calloused skin. His mind raced over the signs, missing supplies, whispered rumors at the tribe's edge, fleeting glimpses of a shadow moving silently behind them. The desert had been unkind enough. Now deception burrowed beneath the very feet meant to protect. Outside, the wind whispered through the crevices, an eerie lament from the ancient stones themselves. It carried with it the echoes of a time when the land belonged unchallenged to the ancestors. A memory that refused to be silenced, no matter how greed clawed at its edges. Agatha shifted, her frail body trembling slightly. "There is more than gold here, Tayan. The treasure we seek, it is not merely metal or jewels. It is knowledge, the lifeblood of our people. The stories etched into the earth by those who came before us. Forgotten secrets that bind spirit and flesh." Her hand brushed the faded parchments tucked beneath her cloak, the delicate paper worn from years of hidden passage. His gaze met hers, the gravity of her words settling like stone in the pit of his stomach. If Jonas gets hold of it, she continued, voice hoarse but unwavering, he will scatter those threads, destroy what little holds our tribe together. We cannot let that happen. Tyan glanced toward the mouth of the cave, where shadows flickered beyond the reach of their firelight. The mercenaries were close, closer than before. Their pursuit relentless, their hunger insatiable. The bitter edge of desperation sharpened in his soul. We move at first light, he vowed, voice low but steady. We protect what remains, even if it costs us everything. The words tasted like ash, bitter and real. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed beneath the rocks. The crackle of dry leaves, the brittle snap of a twig. Tyan's head snapped up, heart jerking. Something, or someone, was moving just beyond the darkness. He willed his breath to slow, senses on razor edge. Agatha's eyes widened faintly, the old fear flickering behind the resolve. They come, she breathed. And with them, the betrayal. The flames danced violently, casting grotesque shapes across the cave walls. Tyan's hand went instinctively to the pouch at his waist, a collection of relics and tokens from his ancestors. The weight of his responsibility settled heavier than ever. In this moment, every choice would mark a future none could yet glimpse. Through the cracked opening, the desert seemed to hold its flickering breath. The fragile sanctuary was no longer safe, not with the enemy so near, and the sharp sting of treason piercing their hearts. Trust was shattered, their hopes splintered, and the path ahead cloaked in shadow. Agatha's voice broke through the oppressive silence, trembling yet resolute. There is a prophecy, Tyan, a silent one, spoken long ago. It says that the heart of the desert will reveal its truth, only when tested by fire and blood. The treasure is not what the blind seek. It is a key to bind us, or to unmake us. He bowed his head, the weight of her words folding into his very being. Then we have no choice but to face it, together. The flicker of their dying fire cast long shadows, as the night deepened into a velvet black. From the silence emerged a whisper, soft, almost unnoticeable, a rustle of movement among the stones. A figure moved with quiet purpose, cloaked in the dust and darkness. A young warrior's courage stirred beneath moonlight's pale gaze, ready to confront the encroaching darkness. The mercenaries were near, their ambitions deadly as ever, but before their footsteps could close the circle of destruction and despair, the desert would answer, with secrets unveiled, loyalties tested, and the fragile hope of a legacy still fighting to survive. The sun had sunk lower than Agatha's weary eyes dared to follow, yet the pale light still clung stubbornly to the distant ridges as Tyan led her through the shattered remains of what once was a thriving Apache village. The ruins lay silent, bones of ancient stone, half buried beneath the sand and dust, ghosts of a time when this land sang under the feet of his people. As they navigated the narrow crevices and toppled walls, Agatha's frail hands brushed against a crumbling wooden post, her fingers trembling at the touch of something sacred. The faint scent of sage and smoke seemed to linger in the dry air, as though the spirits of Ancestors whispered warnings just beyond hearing. Tayan's gaze flickered over her pale face, shadowed by years of hardship, yet lit by a spark of determination that refused to yield. "We've come far, Agatha. These stones remember what you tell me, but they're also a trap. We must be vigilant." His voice was low, firm, carrying the weight of a protector and a seeker, bound together by fate. Within the remains of what once had been a communal hearth, Tayan's boot struck something solid, half buried beneath a thin layer of sand. He knelt, hands steady despite the ache that gnawed at his muscles, and brushed debris away to reveal a crude stone altar, cracked but dignified in its brokenness. Embedded in its crevices lay fragments of pottery and beads of polished turquoise, the remnants of a legacy too easily forgotten. Agatha's breath caught. This was sacred ground where my people called the spirits home. Her voice faltered just briefly, then steadied with a quiet fierceness. And beneath it, beneath these stones, lies the heart of the story, the artifacts that must not fall to the mercenaries' greed. Carefully, she produced a bundle wrapped in worn leather, unfolding it to reveal relics that gleamed faintly even under the obscurity of twilight. Beads, carved bone, and small figures shaped from silver and stone. Tayan's fingers closed around one talisman shaped like a hawk, the emblem of his tribe, and the weight of history pressed upon him in an instant. A sudden rustle shattered the fragile stillness. From the shadows emerged a handful of warriors from the nearby tribe, faces wary, but resolute, their eyes reflecting the firelight scattered from the last sunbeams. They had come, uneasy but compelled, to join the cause. Their presence offered both relief and heavy responsibility. One of the elders, his hair streaked with gray, stepped forward with measured steps. "We honor the blood that still flows here," he said gravely. "We stand with you, boy and elder. The land's pain is our own." His voice carried the weight of generations, an unspoken oath to defend the fragile legacy. Together, they inspected the ruins, voices hushed in reverence, as plans began to take shape. They would protect what remained, even if it meant risking their very lives against the approaching storm. The flickering horizon bore the silhouettes of men armed to destroy, relentless in their pursuit. Tayan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the landscape. "Jonas's men have tracked us well," he murmured. "They know this place is the key." Agatha nodded slowly, her body weaker, but her will as tenacious as ever. If they break through, all is lost. That which should be guarded in shadows will be torn to light, and my people will suffer beyond measure. But distant clang echoed, the harsh metallic ring slicing through the quiet. The mercenaries had closed in, cutting off the narrow passes and sealing the paths that had once offered escape. The last route out lay behind them, now blocked. The elder warriors exchanged grim looks. "They set their trap too close," one murmured. No turning back. Tayan's hand tightened on his spear. Every muscle coiled for what was to come. A siege of flesh and spirit that would decide more than mere survival. Agatha's gaze fell on the ancient map clutched to her chest. Fragments of faded lines, promising both salvation and doom. "The future rests on what we do here," she said with shaking conviction. If we fail, it will not only be our treasure lost, but the soul of a people. Outside, the sun hemorrhaged behind the mountains, drowning the desert in bruised purples and fiery reds. Shadows deepened between the rocks as Jonas's men prepared their final assault, spearheading the encroaching darkness with rifles leveled and tempers flared. In the face of certain danger, amidst the crumbling stones of history and hope, Taian squared his shoulders and met Agatha's steady gaze. They stood not merely as survivors, but as guardians, a youth's courage uniting. With a lifetime of stories to protect the bloodline of a tribe, the only way forward was through the storm. Just then, a low murmur rose among the gathered warriors, the unmistakable sound of boots converging from multiple directions. Jonas and his men had encircled the ruins, intent on this last stand. The desert held its breath. The night would soon burst into fire and fury. Jonas's voice rang out, loud and cruel, slicing through the tense air. "You're trapped. Surrender the relics, and we might let you live." But Taian stepped forward, spear gleaming faintly under the moonlight. "We will never bow to those who come only to take without honor. Here we fight." Agatha closed her eyes, whispering a prayer as the desert wind howled against the rocks, the final battle drawn near. The only escape left was through courage, sacrifice, and the secrets buried deep beneath their feet. Jonas and his group blocked the only route of escape, preparing for the final siege. The desert air hung heavy with anticipation as Taian and Agatha settled among the scattered stones of the ancient Apache village, its silence pressing in like a weight from forgotten centuries. The remnants of walls, half buried by drifting sands and time's relentless hand, guarded secrets that had long waited beneath the sun's fierce gaze. Agatha's trembling fingers brushed reverently against a splintered wooden post. The faintest scent of sage, whispering faint echoes of old rites. Taian's eyes traced the horizon, alert despite weariness etched deep into his young face. "These stones remember," he murmured quietly, "but they do not forgive. We must tread carefully." His voice bore the steadiness of a protector, bound by honor and necessity. He knelt softly, uncovering half-hidden beneath a thin cover of sand, a cracked stone altar. Polished turquoise and fragmented beads nestled in its crevices, relics of a heritage fiercely guarded, yet all but forgotten. Agatha exhaled sharply, a fragile ember of strength ignited in her worn frame. "This ground held the prayers of my people," she said, voice wavering then steadying. "Beneath it lies what must never fall into greedy hands." From beneath her tattered cloak, she revealed a bundle swathed in cracked leather. Unfolding it, artifacts caught the dying light, bone carvings, silver talismans shaped like soaring hawks, emblems of the tribe's undying spirit. Taian clasped one talisman closely, feeling the heavy pulse of ancestry settle into his palm. Movement shattered the fragile stillness, a cautious approach from the shadows. Figures emerged, elders and warriors from the neighboring Apache band, faces etched with wariness but burning resolve. Their arrival was an uncertain balm, strength bolstered, Yet the weight of newfound responsibility thickened the air. An elder stepped forward, his voice gravelly, yet firm, as he addressed them. The blood in this earth connects all who walk these lands. We stand with you, Keeper and the boy, bound by fate and fight. His words carried the solemn cadence of generations, a vow steeped in silent history. Plans took root amidst whispered counsel. They would guard the sacred altar and the fragile hope within, even if it meant risking all against the relentless threat looming beyond the crumbled walls. The distant clatter of horses' hooves and the harsh clang of metal echoed, the mercenaries tightening their net, hunger burning in their cold eyes. Tayan's gaze darted sharply over the rocks. "Jonas knows this place is the heart of it all," he said low, tension coiling in his shoulders. Agatha, pale but unyielding, pressed the brittle map to her breast. "If they breach this sanctuary, the land will bleed, and my people's pain will deepen beyond measure." A sharp metallic clang shattered the dusk, the mercenaries sealing every escape path. The desert's labyrinth of narrow passes was no longer a refuge. It had become a cage. The warriors exchanged grim looks, the language of unspoken acceptance settling amongst them. "They closed the circle too tightly," murmured one, tone thick with foreboding. "No retreat remains." Tayan's hands clenched around his spear's worn shaft, muscles taut as gravity pulled at his breath. They were no longer fugitives. They were defenders, standing on the precipice of oblivion. Agatha's voice, fragile but fierce, broke through the gathering shadows. "What lies beneath is more than treasure. It is the soul of a people. Its loss will shatter more than stone and dust." Outside, the sun bled behind the mountains, smearing the desert sky with bruised purples and angry reds. The shadows grew long and dark as Jonas's men prepared their final assault. Rifles leveled, patience worn thin. Tayan squared his shoulders, meeting Agatha's fearless gaze. They were more than survivors. They were guardians of a legacy fragile as the desert bloom in drought. Their only path forward was forged through wildfire and sacrifice. Suddenly, the murmur of approaching footsteps rose, boots crushing dry earth from all directions. Jonas's men encircled the ruins, their cruel laughter carrying across the bones of the village. Jonas's voice rang out, a whip of scorn slicing the air. "You're trapped. Surrender the relics, and maybe you'll live." But Tayan stepped forward, spear gleaming faintly beneath the cold moonlight. His voice carried the weight and defiance of the desert itself. "We bow to no man who takes without honor. Here we stand and fight." Agatha closed her eyes, whispering a prayer, as the desert wind howled through the restless rocks. The final battle was at hand. The narrow path was cut off. Jonas and his men blocked the only way to safety, their siege looming like a storm ready to tear. Through hope itself, the desert air roared with tension, the ground trembling beneath the relentless surge of horses' hooves and boots. Jonas's mercenaries had surrounded the ancient Apache ruins, their dark shapes hunched behind rocks and sparse mesquite, rifles gleaming cold in the moonlight. The narrow passes were sealed, shadows closing in like the jaws of a trap. Inside the shattered village, Tyon and Agatha moved with quiet purpose among the crumbling stone walls. The air was heavy with dust and echoes, each breath tasting of history and a legacy trembling on the edge of oblivion. Agatha's frail hands clutched the brittle, faded map tightly to her chest as she shuffled beside the youth, her eyes flickering with a steady flame, born of desperation and quiet courage. "We've come too far to let it end here," Agatha whispered, voice cracked but unwavering. "This place, these relics, they are the heart of everything, the spirit of my people." Tyon nodded, the weight on his shoulders heavier than the desert's blazing sun. His spear felt like both weapon and promise in his grip. The mercenaries think only of gold. They do not see what truly lies beneath these stones. A silence fell between them as they approached the carved altar half buried beneath sand and rubble. Tyon knelt and brushed away layers of dust, revealing shards of pottery, beads of turquoise glinting faintly in the dim light, and carved bones, tokens of a past holding more power than any weapon. Agatha's voice trembled with reverence. This was a sacred place, where our ancestors called the spirits to guide them. If they desecrate this ground, the wound will bleed deeper than flesh. From the shadows emerged figures, APACHE warriors, faces rugged and solemn, their eyes sharp but wary. Elders with silver threads in their hair stepped forward, their presence a fragile yet vital shield against the impending storm. An elder's voice, roughened by years of hardship, yet firm with resolve, cut through the quiet. "We stand with you, Tyon, and you, Agatha. The blood of this land runs through all of us." His gaze swept the ruins, a silent oath woven into every word. Tyon exchanged a solemn glance with Agatha. The bond between young warrior and weary guardian forged anew amidst the ruins of time. Plans were whispered urgently, positions to hold, paths to watch, traps to set. The encroaching danger demanded every shred of cunning and bravery they could muster. The distant echo of metallic clangs and horses' shouts grew louder. Jonas's men were tightening their web, blocking every possible escape route, suffocating hope like the desert sun smothering a fragile bloom. Agatha's pale face tightened with determination. If they break through, it won't be just relics lost. It will be the soul of our people torn apart. Tyon crouched low beside her, fingers tightening on the haft of his spear. "We'll hold this ground to our last breath. There's no turning back now." A sudden harsh clang shattered the tense stillness, a mercenary testing their defenses. The fragile peace fractured like brittle stone, the battle crashing closer with every heartbeat. Outside, the bruised sky bled dying light, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to tremble with the fate of all gathered. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the ancient spirits watched, waiting for the outcome. From beyond the rocks came the cruel voice of Jonas, sharp and mocking, carried by the wind. "You're trapped. Surrender the relics, and maybe you live." But Tyon rose, spear held high, his voice ringing with the defiant spirit of a land that had shaped him. "We bow to no man who comes to take without honor. Here we stand and fight." Agatha closed her eyes briefly, whispering a prayer to the unseen ancestors. The wind howled through the crevices, whipping sand and dust around them like a restless fury. The world narrowed to the crackling fire, the gleam of weapons, and the pounding heartbeats of those prepared to defend what could not be replaced. As the mercenaries tightened their siege, sealing the only path of escape with cruel precision, Tayan and Agatha stood together amid the ancient stones, a boy's courage fused with an elder's wisdom, ready to face a storm that promised to tear through hope itself. Then, from the darkness beyond the mercenaries' line, a sudden, sharp movement flickered, a shadow within shadows, a subtle rustle, almost lost in the wind. A figure loomed, moving through the rocks with silent purpose, bearing a secret that could change everything. The desert night swallowed the sound like a whisper, but its meaning thundered louder than any gunshot. The final battle had begun, but an unexpected truth waited to be unearthed beneath the unforgiving sand. The desert night was thick with tension, muffling every breath and step. Tayan and Agatha stood amid the shattered ruins of the ancient Apache village, the weight of many generations pressing down like the oppressive heat they had long endured. The air was heavy with dust and memory, with the sacred ground beneath their feet holding secrets older than any greed could comprehend. Agatha's frail fingers gripped the brittle map close to her heart, as if it were the final tether between past and future. From beyond the crumbled walls, the sounds of movement grew louder. Horses galloping, boots pounding the earth, and the cold clink of rifles raised in deadly intent. Jonas's mercenaries had come to seal off every escape, encircling the ruins like vultures ready to feast on the remnants of a broken people. The narrow passes they once relied on were now iron traps cut off by men blinded by hunger for gold and power. Tayan's gaze remained steady, spear clutched firmly. Beside him, Agatha's pale form shook slightly, but her eyes burned with fierce resolve. "They do not understand what lies beneath this ground," she whispered, voice cracked, but unwavering. "Not just gold, but the lifeblood of our people, the stories and spirits that bind us to this land. If Jonas takes them, the pain will ripple through generations to come." The young warrior nodded slowly. "We will not let that happen. We fight not for treasure alone, but for the soul of our tribe." A murmur of footsteps approached, and from the shadows emerged the warriors and elders who had answered the call. Their eyes were sharp, faces marked by hardship and hardened by loyalty, standing as a fragile but unyielding shield around the sacred altar. The elder, with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward, voice solemn, yet resolute. "This land remembers every life spilled. We stand with you, Tayan and Agatha. Together, we guard what must never fall." Plans were laid swiftly in whispers, the positioning of defenders, the setting of traps known only to those who knew the land's secret folds. Every rock, every shadow became an ally in a desperate bid to hold back the coming storm. The distant clatter of metallic weapons signaled the mercenaries tightening their grip, desperation driving their advance. Agatha pressed the fragile map to her chest, its faded lines tracing a path to hope or ruin. "If they break through," she said softly, "it will not only be the land that bleeds. Our people's heart will shatter beyond repair." Tyon tightened his grip on his spear, muscles coiled like spring traps. "Then we hold this ground to the last breath." The night exploded into violence as Jonas's soldiers launched their assault. Bullets tore the air and sparked against stone, a harsh symphony of chaos. The defenders moved with fierce determination, using their intimate knowledge of the landscape to evade and retaliate. Every step was a balance between life and death, every heartbeat an echo of the ancestors who once walked these lands with pride. In the midst of the fray, Tyon faced Jonas himself. The arrogant mercenary stepped forward, rifle raised and voice dripping with scorn. "Give up the relics, and you might live." But Tyon met him with steady eyes, spear poised like a flame cutting through the darkness. "We bow to no man who takes without honor. Here we fight." Clashes rang out, a brutal dance where strength met spirit. Agatha, though frail, lent her voice in chants rooted in ancient rites, calling upon the spirit world for protection and courage. The warriors rallied, their resolve hardening like steel forged in fire. As the battle reached its fevered height, Jonas's men faltered, disoriented by the fierce resistance and the land seeming to protect its own. The sacred ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with quiet power, a force beyond mortal greed. Yet even as the mercenaries' assault waned, a deeper revelation awaited in the desert's heart. After the dust settled and silence fell, Tyon and Agatha ventured to the buried altar, hands tracing the ancient stones where relics lay hidden. Artifacts not just of gold, but manuscripts etched with lost histories, stories of coexistence and respect between peoples long forgotten. There, beneath the merciless sun, lay the true treasure the desert guarded. Knowledge, a legacy of unity and hope that could heal old wounds and forge a new beginning. Agatha's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she lifted a delicate scroll, its words speaking of peace born from understanding. Tyon caught her gaze, the burden of their journey finally lightened by this revelation. "This is the gift we protect," he said softly. "Not gold or silver, but the story that can change everything." As dawn painted the sky with strokes of gold and rose, the tribes' elders gathered, solemn and proud, to hold a ceremony that would bind the old wounds with new promises. Tyon and Agatha stood side by side, no longer merely protector and rescued, but family, guardians of a legacy reborn. Agatha's frail form seemed to gain strength from this newfound purpose, her eyes reflecting the rising sun's warmth. The tribe, once fractured and burdened by past sorrows, now looked toward a future lit by courage, respect, and the enduring spirit of their ancestors. The desert, vast and unforgiving, watched silently as the ceremony unfolded, a solemn vow that what was once lost would never be forgotten again. The shadows of greed and violence receded, replaced by the promise of understanding and shared destiny. Tyon, standing tall amidst the gathered tribe, felt the weight of his ancestors in every breath. The youth who had once found a dying woman in the desert now carried the torch of hope for all who walked this land. And Agatha, the lost elder, had finally found peace, not in escape or survival alone, but in the unbreakable bond forged with a fierce, young heart and a people ready to reclaim their story. The desert winds whispered their certainty. Though the sands shift and time marches on, some legacies endure forever, a testament to courage, a heritage of the soul, and a future born from the ashes of the past. The sun rose fully, bathing the land and its guardians in golden light. The desert was silent once more, but beneath its vast expanse, the story endured, alive and waiting to be told anew.